I don't like AI black boxes. I don't like anything where I can't see what's happening behind the curtains.
The strategy was fairly simple. I would go in with like kind of a provocative statement and then ask a question and let them do the talking and just shut up.
I just gave you 20 seconds of my time, and this guy is just running some cheap LLMs and wasting my time.
I did have the occasional director at some company who was like, why are you addressing me like a friend?
The problem is not using AI. The problem is that the message is bad.
It's not about more, it's about better and then more.
Right? In a world full of noise, screaming louder won't take you very far.
What is up, everyone? Welcome to another episode of Revenue Systems Decoded. We are here live today with Rafael from Centrion. He's also a very good friend of mine. Meanwhile, we are both legends in the space. And after 8 years of doing outbound, Rafael decided to found a new business, software business based on data. It's called Centrion. Today we are here to launch something new to the industry, which we hope will be very exciting. At least we are both excited to talk about it. So yeah, very stoked to have you on today's show, Rafael.
Thank you. Yeah, it was a pleasure to get invited by you, and I look forward to what we're going to talk here. I think it's going to be a great chat.
Amazing, indeed. Before we jump into that, maybe you want to introduce yourself to the public, to the audience. Tell us a little bit more. Who's Rafael?
Yeah, my name is Rafael, and I started my first businesses in high school when I was 16 years old. It was a website agency, and since then I've been kind of doing go-to-market a lot, sort of as a way to survive and as a way to make my projects. And at the time I was doing an agency, a website building agency. So as a way to take those projects and things that I was working to market. And then later on I started working with more companies and then basically got to go deep in go to market and understand the tech side and the psychology and the copywriting and all that stuff. Today we're working on a software for go to market, which we'll talk a little bit more about.
Super exciting, and maybe you can tell us a little bit more how you got started with entrepreneurship at such a young age.
Yeah, so I was in high school at the time, and I was born in a small village in the south of Portugal, which you might think it's not the best place to be an entrepreneur. It's kind of sort of the major industries there are the tourism. It has beautiful beaches. So if you like beaches, you should definitely check out the Algarve. But apart from that, it's not an amazing place when it comes for business, right? So most of the business world goes around tourism and the companies serving those industries and the companies indirectly serving those industries like restaurants and hospitality and those things. And so in the beginning, that was sort of my ICP by definition, because it was the people that I had close to me. So I started by building an agency to kind of serve these companies. Very quickly, I understood that what they needed was not a website, was actually more of the marketing engine. So they wanted traffic. They wanted people coming to their websites to book their experiences, to, get to know their brand and eventually convert. And one day I had a client call me and he's like, oh, do you do Google ads? And I'm like, yeah, of course. I knew nothing about Google ads, but then I went and learned it, and it was always very curious and experimental journey, and also taking bold risks. Of course, when you operate like that, sometimes you're going to disappoint people, but it also comes as a part of, as a lesson and as a way to also improve yourself and manage the expectations that you set with people. But yeah, so it started then, and then I started working in go to market for different companies, also through my agency. I worked with some launches of NFTs that were giving people access to software when NFTs were a thing. And then after that, I started doing some fractional CMO work, and eventually seeing how the space progressed when it came to cold outreach, which was always something that I really liked, because as an entrepreneur, any ways that allow you to grow your business when you're small and unknown for very cheaply, of course, is going to be interesting. And so that's why I kind of got into it, because I was like, okay, this is a way to reach more people and make more money, and I don't have to have millionaire advertising budgets for that. So that's kind of how I got into it. Yeah.
Amazing. Very cool story. And so maybe we can look a little bit back on these 8 years we've been doing outbound. How did you experience the shift that is ongoing and what is now considered GTM engineering, of which we both know outbound is just one part, but let's be fair, it was the major driver behind Clay's brand in the beginning, right? When we started, most of these tools didn't even exist, right? None of that was available. So how did you used to do it? And what's like kind of, your version of the evolution of this industry?
Yeah, I think people like in business, they always did cold outreach, right? So people like even back in the day, like you would send someone an email, and I think, of course, like the reply rates and everything was much better back then because not a lot of people were doing it. And I think things kind of like started to change once we started getting like softwares like Lemlist, right? And that was kind of like the beginning of programmatic outreach at scale. That's when kind of like it clicked for me that it's such an obvious thing, like sending emails to sell your business, right? But I think back then it was mostly like a workflow that wasn't built already. And also maybe the data wasn't built as well. And you see like companies, like more legacy companies like ZoomInfo, their databases and their products are, and even Apollo, they're very built around like enabling an SDR, right? So they come from the thesis that you are a person and you want to find a contact and you want to find their email because you're going to write them an email and you're going to find their number because you're going to call them, right?
Right.
From that to like, okay, Lemlist, right? So now how can we do it at scale? And that's where we got into ICPs and we're like, okay, how can we be smart about list building? Back then, I think most of us were doing like company industry kind of stuff.
The basics.
Yeah, pretty basic. And so we would try to guess like that those companies, also depending on the offer, but that those companies would have a need for what we're selling, right? So there's very like of a guessing game. And then it sort of evolved to like instantly and where you could do the same thing but with more volume. And then it got to today, to where we have tools like Clay that allow you to use AI to personalize that outreach at scale and then basically like automate the part of sending the emails, right? And I think like throughout that shift, we kind of went from a very manual guessing to a improved guessing. And I think now we have to sort of look of ways of not only guessing, but actually having the data and the information to actually understand if a company needs us, But we'll get more into that. So I'm curious also to hear, like, how was your experience, like, through how that transition, like, what were you doing then? And
yeah, definitely. So I think for me, it started as I was like a salesperson trying to sell services back in the day, consulting for small businesses, basically. And so I arrived as I was just newly hired, and as the traditional onboarding usually goes in small companies, I was given a phone, a computer, and that's about it, right?
Go out there.
Yeah, exactly. Figure it out. And so as I was figuring it out, this guy that had hired me shared with me how he used to book meetings as like a recruiter back in the day, right? So it was through the phone. That was the main means. And I was like, okay, cool. I got to have phone numbers, right? And so we started by calling receptionists, basically normal phone numbers of companies.
Like a business phone number, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And so I came up with all sorts of ways of trying to get the mobile phone number, right? Because I realized as I was also browsing the internet, and then shortly after I started, Lemlist came about, and like Guillaume was doing an amazing job on creating a lot of content out there. So I got into that world, in that community, and there were lots of tools, right? Which I was then in the space of growth hacking sales automation, I think.
That's what we would call it back then.
Yeah, exactly, right? Sales automation was, in my opinion, a term, at least to me, made aware of by Guillaume from Lemlist, in that sense that, what I was doing back then, once I figured out how to convert people on the phone and how to just talk to them in a conversational way, the strategy was fairly simple. I would go in with like kind of a provocative statement and then ask a question and let them do the talking and just shut up. And then at the end, they would ask me, what do you do? And then I would just say what they had just been talking about for the last 10 minutes. Yeah, but maybe we can help you. Let's have a call. And I would book like 80% of the people that I was talking to.
Nice.
And I was like, cool, but this
And you
still...
were doing that in Europe?
Yeah.
Okay.
That was in Belgium, specifically calling Belgian people, basically, right? So
Nice.
essentially what was so interesting was, okay, I was like, cool, this is nice, but I still have to do the calls.
Yeah.
While I, I have to carve out time and I still need to do all the prep and all that stuff, right? So I was like, okay, I've now spoken to the same people for like the past 30 days and I kind of figured out what works. And it just worked every time. Let me see if I can put this in an email and get the same results, or at least good enough results for me to be able to have the same amount of calls or a little bit less, but at least for way less time, right? So I put it into a lemlist sequence, and my mission with doing that was always fairly simple. It was like, how many people can I convert through only one email? So I didn't used to do the very big long sequences, which I feel that tools like Outreach and Salesloft, who came about the same time, right, did kind of facilitate for these SDRs or sales reps.
And to touch on something that I think it also kind of changed, right? Because maybe back then people were doing like just one touch, or maybe they were doing very long sequences. And then I remember like a moment in outbound where like sending 5 emails was pretty much like the standard. And I remember like getting good conversions on the follow-ups.
Yeah.
But I think now most people are doing like 2-3 emails at max. Yeah.
Yeah, because of deliverability and all that, right? Like the more complexity, right? But so my point there to continue was I didn't really need a lot of volume because I had great conversion, like 50 to 70% from like the first email, because I would just apply the same framework, so to say, which is like thought-provoking thoughts, open-ended question, and that's it. And let's see.
So you're doing like the poke the bear method?
Yeah, kind of, right? I didn't know what it was called.
You wouldn't pitch anything?
I never pitched anything. If anything, if I wanted to pitch anything, it was more like, I found this, for example, I was selling then later a mobility solution, and I would spend manually time researching. That could already be automated, but anyway, I was doing it manually to test it, research their annual reports that would say, this was when electrification came about, that they would all have like these CO2 reduction goals, right? By 70% by 2030 or 25, like insane goals that is impossible, right? And so I found some research paper that said that about 70% of a company, any company that is not a manufacturing company, emissions come from their fleet, from their car park.
Makes sense,
right? Yeah. So their company cars were emitting all these, so they all were going to go electric, right? And so I would put this, you have this electrification number. Did you know that, I validated this over the phone, and then I would say, did you know that electric vehicles also emit emissions, right? So if you have here a zero emission goal, the solution is not to go electric. The solution is to have less cars, right? And so the same thing would kind of happen, right? And so as we progress over time until about 2023, this kept working. Right. And then for some reason,
so you were sort of like poking their curiosity and then kind of like engaging them on that. Yeah.
Simple framework. I had information confirming that this was an ongoing project, right? And I would always know who would be in charge, or at least have a good guess, right? One thing, if I didn't know who it was, I would go to C-level, say the same stuff, because this is something in their annual report. Like, obviously they care about it, right? Because otherwise, it wouldn't be in there. Yeah. So C-level cares about it, and I would just say the same thing. And instead of asking them their opinion, because they probably don't have a solution or don't know what's up specifically, I would say, who is in charge of this, right? And they would reply saying who, or even put that person in CC, right? And then I had, again, insane amounts of conversion on that because the CEO told them to speak to me, right? Yeah. So that was kind of amazing.
I feel like that was the golden age where that kind of trick worked. Like today, it's so it's so hard to pull that off.
Yeah, exactly. So now we're like, approaching end of 23, and I see it like, getting more harder. I see people talking about these alternative inboxes, things like that. And I'm like, what the hell is happening here? Right? And so okay, obviously I stumbled upon Clay, started using Clay to build better lists, etc., even though my list building wasn't really the problem. But yeah, I just found it so interesting that at that moment I kind of realized, okay, this is going to be a turning point for all these SDRs, because if my hyper-targeted sequences are already getting less response, imagine a templated 10 sequence email from deal.com or whatever that has like, 1,700 people in it just receiving the same message without any spin tags, without any relevant personalization. And that's just straight up pitching like, hey, we can help you hire remotely, right? So it's like those companies is going to be in big trouble, right? And that's the moment when I decided like I'm kind of was 1 + 1 was 2. And I said, okay, I need to, build a business around this because I had been doing this and I was kind of good at it. So I'm like, I should be able to help more companies. So that's how I kind of saw it. And then super interesting was Clay coming out with this term role called GTM engineering, which was like, wow, that's what I've been doing for the last 5-6 years, which is basically this technical person who has the ability to engineer a go-to-market motion programmatically, right? Before you can do that, though, you need to figure it out manually, right? But what's your take on on where we're at now and what's then the next?
I was gonna say something to what you just said, which is like I hear from like the top GTM people, and it's something I do personally as well. Is before starting a campaign, like you can quickly get too lost in like the different ways that you can use AI to personalize. You can do the personalization based on something that you observe. So like a trait, like a person works here, person has this title. Yeah, sort of like how when you're trying to come up with the copy for the message that you're gonna send, I always found easier for me to be like, okay, what is the data that I have available? And with the data that I have available, how could I come up with a good message for this prospect? And then after you do it like 5 or 10 times, you kind of like understand like, okay, this is sort of like the baseline of what I'm trying to do. And this is how it changes for different people. So maybe this client is a bigger company. Maybe this is a smaller company. This is like where it changes. And I feel like that's where great prompts come from, right?
100%.
But what I'm also curious now is, and it's something that I've been experimenting a lot with, is how can you have that like sort of like rules and structure to a prompt, but how can you insert the random effect into it? Why do I say this? And random is not like completely random, but I feel like different data within the same kind of data that you're looking for.
Right.
Because, for example, one of the things we're exploring a lot at Centrion is how to build like a context engine. So like how do we not only make a signal actionable, but how do we build a profile of the company and the person, allowing us to track behavior over time, and not only their behavior, but also our interactions with them, building that center of context that every time that there's a trigger or a signal, that center of context is pulled into the prompt so that we can write a message that not only understands the pain and can position our product and provide value to the prospect, but also understand like the stage of our relationship with them. Right. And the stage in the moment that they're at and what's important for them and what are their pain points. Because if we have that information, we can then tie that with our offering and we can write much better emails, Instead of saying like, oh, you probably have this pain point, we can actually say like, I know you have this pain point.
Right.
And this is how we solve for other customers.
Right. And that's a super interesting thing because I feel that no matter your specific go-to-market motion, like the number one denominator of success, like substantial success, right? We're talking crazy amount of leads, crazy high conversion, crazy revenue growth is to be able to express, explain, put in category a problem that a lot of people have or your ICP has and explain it better than they can, right? So it creates that aha moment for them, right? To take action. And they're like, it's kind of like, you know, when you sometimes have conversations with people and you're like, dude, you just said what I've been trying to say for the last month or whatever, right? This explains what I'm feeling or thinking of very nicely in a couple of sentences. Like that kind of simplicity is what you want to go after when it comes to go to market, no matter than the channel of how you reach them, right? Because you can translate that into creative ads, you can translate that into organic content, you can translate that into phone calls, you can translate, like, you know, it doesn't matter, that's just channels and ways of getting there. But if you don't have that clarity, you have to constantly strive for that, right? So if your conversion rates aren't there, that's the origin problem that you need to solve for. And I just wish that a lot of people or company owners or revenue leaders would realize that more, because they're trying to solve for how can we get more responses? Oh, we're just going to send more emails. Like, you know, no, it's not about more, it's about better and then more, right? Because we're just at a point where we can't have lower conversions on email replies. Like, you know, if you see the industry average 1-2%, like we're officially at marketing newsletter response
Levels,
rates, right?
True.
So the mode of converting through email is kind of broken at the moment for most companies. And I feel the ones that still have success, and we see that across clients, I see it across the industry, are the ones who are able to articulate their prospects' pain points clearer than the prospect is, right?
True, yeah.
So it's the same what kind of Clay did, and there's other companies as well. It's what Salesforce did to the CRM. It's what HubSpot did to, content marketing.
Yeah.
Like, you know, and so you have these kind of category creations, and then I feel you need to be able to capitalize on that data, because as a business, you kind of, if you're in that same space and this train becomes a rocket ship, you have the option, right? You're either gonna ride that wave, or you're gonna be stubborn and let it pass, right?
True.
And so it's the same with like other industries, but that's a little bit where I feel we're at now. And so this is now the wave with AI and everything. But of course, in order to be able to have AI working, we need to have great data first, right?
Yeah, yeah. And I think that's where a lot of the AI SDRs miss the point, which is just because you have a job posting, just because you have a new hire, just because you have someone that liked the post, that is a trigger, and that is a limited source of context. And when you give that to AI, I'm even talking about like the more complex, like AI SDRs, because we know like the more basic ones that just pull up like a list based on company industries, they put some boilerplate template and hit send, right? But the ones that I've seen that are a bit more sophisticated are the ones who actually also take into account signals, but they also still do something that I don't see working long term, which is to just get a trigger. So like, company posted this job, person followed this page, and from here I just go like, okay, step 1, signal, company, people, email. This is a very sequential workflow, right? And it has its limitations, right? If you're doing it at scale, and it only works if you're doing new accounts, because if you're working with accounts that you already have, you're going to look, you know, it's going to be a bit embarrassing. It's not only about like, how do we write a perfect, great message and how do we get our foot in the door, but it's also like, how do we build a system that is self-sustainable, right? How do we build a system that keeps reaching out to the same prospects until we convert them, not with boilerplate messages, but with contextual understanding of what they're going through and what they're trying to solve, and what they need at that specific moment, and also the context of our previous interactions, right? Yeah. So that's kind of like where I see this space going. And if anyone out there is going to build an SDR, that's how I would build it, an AI SDR. I, as a go-to-market engineer, like, I believe a lot in the importance of data transparency and control. I don't like AI black boxes. I don't like anything where I can't see what's happening behind the curtains, because that just becomes a huge mess. And I think a big reason why Clay became so successful is because they cracked that. They found a way to use AI in a transparent way, right? Because you can immediately see the result of the prompt that you're using, and then you can tweak it in real time and then see the results of that tweak. Right. So that gives you the trust that as you scale it to like thousands of people, it's not going to be perfect every time, but it's going to have, it's going to understand things a little bit better than if you were just to write a template and let it go. Right. Like a prompt and let it go, right? So I'm curious, like, how do you see that as well? Like, in terms of like how people are going to be building messaging and how we can build sort of like these automated campaigns going forward.
How to address your market in the most efficient way, in my opinion, comes down to once, let's say, we understand exactly who we are for and what we're solving and what's the impact of that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Let's say we've done our homework. The single most important step after that is getting real-time and accurate and reliable data, right? So that your list becomes the message. That's also how I was engineering it like 5 years ago, and what always worked, right? Yes, you can call that personalization. I prefer what you've mentioned a couple of times already, which is context, right? It's like, you know, like now with influencers and just like a lot of content out there, like even us, like, I don't know, one day this might blow up or anything else we do and people might recognize us on the street, right? It's that kind of familiarity, that trust, that kind of feeling like, oh, I know this person before they've spoken to me, that I always try to engineer in my messaging, right? Of course, some people didn't like that, right? I did have the occasional like director at some company who was like, why are you addressing me like a friend? And I'm like, because I feel I already
because I want
know
you to be my friend.
Exactly, yeah. But so that was kind of that, the feeling, that's how I feel. People can be pissed at a well-researched message that is timely and relevant, if you know what I mean. Because you did your homework, right? And so for me, it's all about that, right? So
you're saying they can get pissed?
Can't.
Oh, can't. Oh,
can't.
okay.
I mean, they can. They can do whatever they want.
but yeah, that makes sense.
You know, they only have the legal aspect to play out. Like, you know, who's going to get pissed if we're saying something that is relevant and timely to them and well-researched and well thought of, right? At least I see an increase in replies as soon as you do that, right?
And if I can put a parenthesis to that, I think this is something that a lot of people miss the mark. And I think not so much now, but probably a few months ago, where people was like using AI to like generate emails and like, or even if you're just personalizing a part of the email and the rest of it, you're using a template, like people would say like, nobody likes to get an AI written message. But that's not true. Nobody likes to get a bad, not well-researched, irrelevant, wrongly timed message.
Exactly.
Because when you get a message, I think sort of like in the prospect's mind, it's like a process, right? I read the message and I'm like, okay, I just spent the last 20 minutes, the last 20 seconds looking at this message, reading something that is not for me, something that doesn't understand my business, or some personalization that you went into my LinkedIn and you saw my last post and I can clearly see that it is, you know, or even worse, because that's even the more complex ones, but maybe you just saw my company website and you just said like, oh, you guys are building amazing signals. And like, no shit. So I think like that, what goes into prospect's mind is like, okay, look, I'm spending 20 seconds of my time looking at a message that you took zero time to send it because you just ran some AI automation. It's not for me. It's bad personalization. I'm not a fit for this. So that's when I get a little bit, you know, like, damn it. You know, like, I just gave you 20 seconds of my time, and this guy is just running some cheap LLMs and wasting my time. So you sort of feel a little bit like at a disadvantage, you know, because it's like, okay, I'm giving you my time, but you're not giving, you know. So, but I think the problem is not using AI. The problem is that the message is bad. Right. So if you have a perfect message, nobody cares if it's written by AI or by you or by a real human.
Yeah, exactly.
They just get it like, look, I'm actually at a point where I would need some solution like this. And this person pointed out something that they know about us, and they've explained it to me on that first message, how I can get value from that product or that service specifically for me. So that's, I think it's also the next level in terms of prompt engineering, for you to understand what the client does, give it context of what you do, and have the AI understand like sort of like how you can integrate into each other, and also have like ideas. You could send an email with ideas.
Right.
But I think that's always a great approach. It's sort of like, how can you on your first message get as close as possible to the value or the outcome of using your product? Right. And that ties a lot into what Jordan Crawford says, the permissionless value proposition, which essentially just means that when you're sending an email, you're going to be pitching a unique piece of value that can be uniquely generated for that customer based on something that you've observed. Right. And that could be in this context of, for example, if you're running a tech company and you're generating some data, right? And what you do is like you generate some sort of data, or you make it accessible, some kind of data to a specific customer, right? You can run AI and sort of like understand like what part of our data would be useful for this customer. Right. And then either manually or programmatically, you could then pitch that value. Like, look, here's a sample of what we can do for you. Go check it out.
Exactly. Yeah, 100%. I think that it essentially comes down to trying to engineer more predictability into the system, right? And like getting to a higher close rate, right? Because at the end of the day, most of what we do gets associated with more revenue, more meetings, better outreach, right? And so we generally like to work with companies who understand that doing outbound is a process through which you'll learn a lot because you'll get a lot of feedback, right?
True.
When we do let's say we do a campaign for a customer, we're like trying to get like 8 to, or let's say between 5 and 10% reply rate. We're not doing super high volumes, but imagine like you're sending to 1,000 people and you have like 10, 20, maybe 30 responses. That's data. Like, imagine how long it would take you to speak to 20, 30 people.
True.
In that way, like, using the same manner, etc.
Which is why I think, just to make a parenthesis there, that like for startups and companies who are like still finding product market fit, you should definitely reply to your negative replies.
100%.
And ask them why. And maybe give them like...
You should call them.
Yeah, you should call them, yeah. And I like to do one thing, which is like kind of like sort of like give them options that they can just send like A, B, or C. Because it's sort of like also like in the same like sort of thinking as the sales psychology trick of like get the first yes so that you can get more yeses. Because there's a study that like in human psychology, if you say yes once, even if it's for a small meaningless thing, it's more likely that you'll get a yes after. And I think like, for example, if you can manage to turn a negative reply into, for example, A, I don't have this problem, B, I use another solution, C, I don't like your product, for example. And let's say the prospect replies B or C, that not only gives you data and feedback, but they already replied to you once. So the chances of them continuing to engaging with you after that are higher than if you would have never replied to that negative email. So
yeah, you can call it building a relationship, right? It doesn't have to be transactional, and so that should be engineered in your growth as well, right? Because you want to leave a good impression. At least that was always also when I was manually prospecting my objective, because that, like, when you do a lot of cold calls specifically, you get a lot of rejection, right? That's why I feel most SDRs hide behind doing emails or LinkedIn messages, because they don't, like, it's kind of like cyberbullying. You don't feel it that much, if you know what I mean, right? No diss on cyberbullying, by the way, but it is very dangerous. Let's not get that twisted. But anyway, my point here is that through that kind of discomfort, you grow, you learn, and you become better. So my objective was always to make the other person remember me in a positive way, right? To have positive impact, and that is not tied to the outcome of the conversation. Right?
That's a very like Pinterest phrase. Like people will not remember what you say. People will remember how you make them feel. So.
It's kind of true, like, and I got into like the psychology of all this and also physiology of all this. Like, people can hear it in your voice when you're smiling, like, all those kind of things. So it's the same when you're like gonna send outreach, right? Are you gonna write, if you're gonna write in a way that could be misinterpreted, right?
That's very easy to do.
You're gonna have certain reactions that we're not gonna pronounce here, but those might occur because you're kind of initiating that, right? So I think their intention is very important. But let's go back to the data, right? I think you mainly came here today to launch this new concept that you've been working on, and I would love to hear your take on it, right? To make go to market more predictable.
Yeah, so I think like sort of like the whole journey for me personally, like with outbound, was a little bit of like, I had my companies, I wanted to take them to market. And then I finished the project and I looked at this go-to-market space because I was doing fractional CMO at the time. And I had done cold email for one of our clients. I was kind of like thinking, this doesn't make sense. Like this strategy of like, I'm going to like get a huge bucket of companies. I'm going to get like 500,000 companies. And I'm going to like reverse engineer a reason to reach out to them. Right. You know, I'm like, so how can I reach, what can I say that's going to make them, interested.
Right.
And that's kind of where you get into like the whole, okay, what kind of data can I get? How can I get that data? How can I make a smart observation? Right.
Like you have an office, you should, you need my lemonade maker.
Yeah. And that's cool. Right. But I feel like most of that only becomes like truly actionable and scalable as of like until now when you're working with company traits, right? When I say company traits, it's things that don't change, right? So where the company is based, usually, I mean, they can change, but if they change, they're very slow and over time, right? So it would be like where the company is based, the headcount range, the technologies that they use, the industry that they work in, the products that they develop. Like those are things that change not very often. And you can do a lot with that. There's a lot of ways of getting like different data. But sort of like for me, it was like, why am I reverse engineering a reason to reach out to these people? Why don't I focus on the people that I can actually have a good reason to reach out to, right? And so it got me thinking of like, how could I understand what's happening inside of a company? How could I understand where they're putting their budget on? What is top of mind for them? Like sort of like what are the initiatives, their goals? And then I started looking into signals. I remember like our good friend Mark Colgan. I even like was a little bit more into his content back then because he used to be one of the very few people talking about signals. And I'll be looking at it.
Shout out Mark.
Yeah, and I'll be looking at it, and I'm like, okay, new hires, okay, everyone's doing that. Funding, everyone's doing that. And I was thinking like, what is the source of information that can give me this context? And that was very clearly job postings. And then I started to see like in the whole GTM space, and it's like, okay, not many people are using job postings. Why? There's so much gold hidden on the jobs descriptions. Like companies literally saying that they're going to launch a new product, that they're adopting AI, that they're opening a new office in a new country, that they want to cut costs on the legal department, whatever, Like you can get very granular and get a lot of context of what's happening by looking at one or many job postings, right? And then I started to think like, okay, so if before I was trying to reverse engineer a reason to reach out to people, and now I can actually start from the reason and build my prompt and my message around the reason. And it not only gives me a reason, but it also gives me perfect timing, right? Because and it gives me validation that this is an actual problem that they have. So it means that they are in market because they have deployed budget towards it.
Exactly.
Right?
They're hiring someone to fix it. Yeah.
Exactly. And that's sort of like when the concept of predictive go-to-market kind of like started to make sense for me. It's a little bit the opposite of traditional go-to-market in the sense that here you actually are operating and you're starting with the first thing you ask yourself when you're building a campaign is what company behavior, what needs, what projects, what changes need to be happening for them to be a perfect customer for me, right?
Right.
And I think not all offers fit into that. And that's where I think you can kind of like separate most offers into two buckets. And in one side, you could say like there's offers for which you would be doing like, for example, demand generation. And those would be for like if you're offering a service or a product that is an improvement over something that they're already doing, or maybe you got a legacy product and you stitched AI into it, like, or maybe you're cutting, like you're saving costs or you're making something a little bit more efficient. In those cases, I think your main goal is to generate awareness over that.
Right. It's more new. You need to, educate, spread a new message.
Yeah. You can still use signals, but you can still get away with the approach of like, okay, sort of like defining the ICP and putting guardrails around that. And
it would be like Clay 2 or 3 years ago trying to use the job post for a GTM engineer as a signal, right? It was non-existing. So yeah, they had to generate the demand and generate the role for it first, right? So,
but in what way? What do you mean?
I mean, they can't do signal capturing because the signal wasn't existing yet, right?
Oh,
That's what you're trying to say with the, if you have something more new, right? Because now they can go after people who, are doing job posts for GTM engineer because that will mention Clay 100% of the time.
Yeah.
Because it's based on them, right?
Yeah.
But then 3 years ago, that wasn't there, right?
Yeah, it's an interesting thing. So I'm doing a go-to-market engineering report with Alex Lindehall.
Okay.
And one of the things we did is like we pulled all go-to-market engineer jobs for the last 5 years, and Clay was mentioned in about 50%, exactly like 49% of them. And I'm wondering if the companies that are not mentioning Clay is because they forgot and maybe there was some miscommunication between leadership and the HR team, or if there are actually companies who are using this role without using Clay. Maybe using like other platforms or something. So that's something to be curious about. Yeah, coming back to predictive go-to-market, what I call the predictive go-to-market flywheel is sort of like this step-by-step process, and it's a flywheel because it repeats, right? So at the first stage, you have like company and people behavior and changes trigger a campaign, right? So they are the reason why you're going to initiate outreach. After you have that, you go and of course, that trigger reveals pain points and gives you context, but then you might want to layer in other pieces of data, right? So do we have an interaction before? Sort of like looking for other signs of behavior that could give you more context so that you could identify more pains, more needs, more projects, different tech stacks, and then overall just write a better email, and also just make it work on evergreen, because you don't want to be sending the same message. If you have a relationship with a company, or if you already reached out to them like a month ago, you don't want to be sending the same template again, right? So that's one of the things we're solving at Centrion. By having this, okay, so you have the trigger, you have the center of context, then you can have like relevant outreach with perfect timing, and you can repeat it. And I think that's sort of like what we're trying to do at Centrion, is making it actionable and automated, but not only automated, not only being a system of action, but also being a system of context.
That's amazing. Yeah. And it's been like more than a year now that you've been working on this behind the scenes, kind of as we have been talking about this more frequently in the last months. It made me realize that, like, of course, in order to be able to find that context in those job posts, again, you need to be clear on what you're solving, right? So the pain points that you're solving need to be identifiable, right? But having covered that, going after those, using that job post information and also historic information, right? You've mentioned previous contact. It might be job posts from the past, right? You can indeed get to the ultimate GTM alpha, right? Which would be that predictive go-to-market, right? Because, I gave you the example months ago that when I was selling myself as a fractional salesperson, I knew that when I had someone in front of me, a potential client, someone I could potentially help, I would usually ask them within the first 5 minutes how their experience has been with previous salespeople, right? And they would tell me always the same thing, right? 2 or 3 people that they brought in who weren't a fit, but it was also not per se that person's fault, right? They just weren't like, the person that was gonna, and also fix their ICP and get the value prop clear and like do a lot of other stuff that the salesperson is not naturally trained to do. Or
so
enable.
Just like throw people out there and see what happens.
Exactly. So, right, that made me wonder, like, if I could identify companies where there was a salesperson, he stayed 3 to 6 months, then a second salesperson came in, right? There's still just 1 or 2 salespeople, right? Because that would usually be my case. I would be the only salesperson, or the second one then kind of outperformed the other and made them realize, okay, we'll just continue with Olivier, that's it. But other than that...
He's been taking jobs before AI, guys.
No, just kidding. But yeah, that was an interesting thing, right? And then with the job posts, you kind of made me realize that, wow, that's the way to do it, right? Because, okay, I could go into a company and I could then try to cross-run programmatically previous employees at those companies, and like that can all be done, right? But I was alone, so I didn't need that scale per se. So now looking forward on this, being able to go to Centrion and like kind of say, give me all the companies, B2B SaaS companies with 11 to 50 employees who have 1 to 3 people max in the sales team, and, you know, have high churn when it comes to their sales reps. Is amazing. Like, you know, it will give me a list. And even if it's just 10 companies, it really doesn't matter. Like, all I need is 1 or 2 or 3. Like, you know, at the end of the day, that's where we're trying to aim at, to get your close rate as high as possible. And also, secondly, it will redefine how we think about ICPs, right? Because now you can say your ICP are, let's say, B2B SaaS companies doing 10 to 50 million in ARR, who have at least 5 salespeople, right? So they can actually convert the meetings that we booked for them, right? But if I look at my data and knowing that what is possible today, how would I be able to engineer my predictive GTM? It would be really mainly based on what projects are they mentioning in their job post, right? And so what would happen is, for example, I could tie together data from people that are doing ads, look at their spend. Is it going up? Right, in the next months? And if then at the same time they have a vacancy or job post live that mentions they want to start an outbound motion, that's the moment that I'll pitch. I'll convert to meeting at plus 50%. I'll convert to proposal at plus 80%. And I'll convert to deal as much as I can handle, basically.
Yeah, because you're very prepared for that sale, because you understand very well what they're going through, and because you've done it before, right?
Right.
I think another 2 playbooks that you could do there is, for example, you could look for companies that are hiring SDRs but don't have any RevOps go-to-market function.
Exactly.
Another playbook that you could do would be companies who are hiring their first go-to-market person or their first RevOps person,
right?
You know?
Yeah.
Or you could look for companies, because, you know, like some people also don't understand really what the role is of a RevOps or a go-to-market engineer.
100%.
So sometimes they will try hire a salesperson or a sales manager, thinking that they're going to do those things. And that's where looking for job description keywords becomes very useful.
Exactly.
You know?
Very funny that you give that example, because I actually have someone I know who's looking for a GTM engineer, right? They're super small. They're starting out. I think they raised some capital now. Not sure. But anyway, they want to scale, which is great. It's cool stuff that the guy does. And he was announcing it on LinkedIn, looking for a GTM engineer. And as far as I know, first company in Belgium officially using that. Shout out, you know who you are. But anyway, so I was like, cool, interesting, like to be one of your first hires, right? So I was like, send me the JD, and he sent me the JD, and it's like he's looking for this magic wizard who can do like what we do, right? Like, and close and generate the demand and like do all these campaigns. And I was like, yeah, that's just not going to happen most likely.
Yeah.
Because if you can do that, you're just running an agency or doing a fractional, right?
Yeah, or you'd be like properly misusing your assets, right? Because
I mean, yes, or there would be other motivation, but I still think that that is also not what a GTM engineer is supposed to do. And that's also kind of an interesting thing. Maybe we don't need to touch upon it now, but I'll just coin it now. That I do see happening in the space is that the term is by a lot of companies in America correctly interpreted, but by European ones, I see them kind of misunderstanding the role, as they have also mostly not understood very well RevOps. Yeah. It's like a combination of this RevOps with like an SDR kind of mindset.
Some people also try to hire a marketing automation specialist.
Voila, exactly, things like that. And yes, okay, that's cool. But I see a lot of GTM engineers on the market who have no previous sales experience, right?
Yeah.
And so then I'm like, okay, that's probably not so aligned with what's available on the market if you're going to be, looking for those people. So I kind of see two types of GTMs engineers right now, right? It's the ones that are list builders on steroids, copy pasting and applying hopefully effective playbooks that are out there, which is okay, it's a job as any other job. It will create impact, right? And then the second is, and that's the ones would be interested to see in your report if you see the same, but from most of the vacancies I've been seeing in the US are more on the second part, which is really this technical genius that will empower the GTM team and RevOps function, one or the other, depending on how they're structured. But anyway, which will empower, basically make happen on a technical aspect, the GTM strategy that was defined by revenue leadership. Right? Which in my opinion is the correct way and what should be the defined role of a GTM engineer, right? So that being said, we've already touched upon like AI and predictive GTM. It's changing ICP, so it means it's changing list building, right? Do you want to give any specific like example of how it could be applied?
Yeah, I think we can kind of like put the 3 different ways of building a list into like, their own place. And I think the first one, which is the most popular one, is traditional firmographic. So you are building a list based on a company trait, based on the company industry, the company size, the company's products, the company's size. I think I said that already. And so these are
static data.
Yeah, static data, right? And that's where you're making a guess, and you're making a guess that they have a problem that you solve, which most of them will not. I think there was a metric. I think it was even Mark who shared it. I don't know where he got it from, but there's like 5% of companies are actually in market, right? So you're reaching out to 95% people who don't care about you.
Exactly.
So that's one. And then the second one is you got to go through a lot of work to reverse engineering good ways of like reaching out to them, right?
100%.
So that's the first one, right? And I think a lot of people are still stuck there. And then the second one is the trigger or signal-based campaign building, right? And that's when you observe something that changed and you're like, hey, I saw that you're hiring.
Right.
Hey, I saw that you just got funded. Of course, please don't open an email with this with this copy, right? Because of course it's like when you get funded and when you post a job, you get like outreached by a lot of people. So most people are using it like this. So you don't want to like tie it to the event itself because the event is not so important. More important is what the event means for you,
right?
As a solution provider, right? And that's where you should focus your copy around. But even still, this approach is limited, right? Because what happens when a new signal comes through for that same company?
Right.
What happens when you want to recirculate your TAM?
Right.
What happens when you want to build predictability?
Right.
So those things are very hard to build, and that's where predictive go-to-market comes into play.
Right.
Because predictive go-to-market adds the context layer to this. It adds the multi-signal layering, right? And that's what we call predictive go-to-market in terms of in terms of list building, is a way to build lists based on compounded company behavior that comes from different signals and the traits, right? So the traits are still important,
right?
But they just kind of like guide the list that you're building based on pain points, needs, projects, initiatives, and changes that are happening in the company. Because the reality is that companies spend money when things change,
right?
Or when they want things to change,
right?
And in which two cases they are very relevant for you. And sort of like the differentiating between things having changed and wanting things to change is very much present in job postings,
right?
Because when you want things to change, you go and look for someone that can help you do that, right? If you think your sales department is not good, you're going to go look for a new director of sales,
right?
If you think your workflows are not good, you're going to look for someone who can fix them, right?
100%.
Or you're going to look for an agency or an outside provider, but still, you got to have someone in-house to manage those third-party relationships,
right?
So you're still going to hire that person as well.
And there was an inflection point, some kind of event that triggered that decision to then take action to posting the job, right?
Yeah, exactly. So there's already been multiple conversations inside of the company.
Exactly.
They approved the budget for it.
Exactly.
They paid someone to go and look for that person. They paid someone to go and post that job, So it's a lot of work, right? But the most important thing is that it's a way of doing outbound that kind of layers in like multiple things that you need for an outbound campaign to be successful, right? So first thing that you need is you need the company to be in market. You need the company to want and need your services.
Right.
The second thing is you need to write your messaging, having context of your product and what's happening at the company, right? You want to come in well researched. So that's when knowing what's happening at the company and knowing your product and knowing the context of your relationship makes it very useful to write a good message.
Exactly.
Right? So targeting, messaging, what's the last piece? Timing, right? When you're reaching out. And we see a lot of companies, sometimes they fail because they reach the market too early, right? Or I'll even give you the example of a situation that I just experienced recently. So the year was about to end, was probably like one of the last work days. And I had a call with a very big company, and I was talking with a go-to-market person, and I was like super excited to show them Centrion, but I could see that the energy was not there. Like this person was like, yeah, it's my last, I'm like the last person at the office. And I'm like, everyone's out for the holidays. And the call was quite cold, you know, and the reason, and then I got questioning myself. I'm like, why did this happen? Like the previous calls that we had were amazing. We always had like, you know, good interactions and I could see things going in a good direction. But then that last call was sort of like, you know, it wasn't the same feeling. And of course, then I thought like, that makes sense because it's not the right timing, right? What that person was thinking is like, how can I get done with my tasks as soon as possible so that I can go for Christmas and celebrate the new year? Like, I don't want to know about a new tool, right? But now we're in January, and now everyone's thinking what they're going to change this year. Everyone's thinking what they're going to improve, what they're going to do better. So I got in touch with that person again, and now the interaction is different, right? So the company might need your product. You might write a perfect message for them, but if you're not sending it at the right moment, you're not going to get a reply. I think predictive go-to-market kind of engineers, by definition, the perfect solution for these three stages, right? You got the perfect timing because they've approved the budget and they have a need. You got the good message because you know what's happening for them and you know the history and the context and all of that. And you got the right person because you're targeting companies based on needs and not based on the industry that they've selected on LinkedIn.
Right. And that actually brings me to a very interesting thought I just had, which is, but Rafael, imagine someone saying this to you, right? But Rafael, what are we going to do if the amount of companies in markets are not enough for us to hit our quota? I have here 10 SDRs, 20 sales reps or whatever, like, you know, a lot of mouths to feed. I sold my investors that we're going to grow to 100 million ARR in the next 3 years. We're at 10 now. Where I'm going to get 90 million in ARR from with a close rate of 20% right now. If the companies in market are only, I don't know, whatever, 100 a month or 1,000 a month. 1,000 a month would be a lot, but 100 a month, right?
Yeah, that's a very good point. And I think like when it comes to that, first, if there's not a lot of companies in market for what you're doing, you might not have a great business or you might have found like a great niche, you know, in which you can capitalize. But then the second thing, that's where I think demand generation becomes very important. And when I say demand generation, not only on the outreach side, but also on the branding side, also on the positioning side, showing up where your prospects live in the internet and in person. That's where I think the demand generation and the predictive go-to-market like movements work very well together, because on one side, you're generating demand. So you're being top of mind for your customers. So whenever they have a need, they're going to think of you. But also, you can't rely on people thinking of you, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So
it's not predictable.
So predictive go-to-market allows you to then react on the basis of changed and observable needs. You can then trigger that ecosystem that is capturing demand, right? And so that's where I think those two strategies work very well. Of course, not everyone's going to post a job for a need that they have. They might reach out to someone. They might even work directly with a recruiter. And that's where the demand generation is going to serve you well, so that you can show up for those people.
100%. And I think it also applies indeed very well for businesses who have a more horizontal solution approach business, right? But I think it would also touch upon, probably a conversation for another time, but on a very essential thing that that I feel for years that is inherently broken, especially in SaaS, is having a bloated go-to-market approach, more so really a bloated perception of the market and bloated targets that puts a lot of pressure on people without actually benefiting anyone. And in that sense, I believe that having a great understanding of who's in market and what data to look for will give you so much more clarity on what to build and how to go to market in general. So I'm always amazed when I talk to companies, no matter the stage, that don't have any clue on their market, right?
Yeah.
Who are like, what's their
and
ICP, what's their...
I think that comes from this like trying to put a square in a circle approach to go to market, which is how do I reverse engineer a reason to reach out to this? But why do I have to reverse engineer a reason to reach out to someone? Maybe because I don't have a great reason from the get-go, right? So that's why I'm looking for one.
Exactly. You're trying to force it, right? You can
exactly. And then you're like, okay, like which sort of like group of people can I reverse engineer reason to reach out to? And that's where I think, for example, like a lot of non-technical or a lot of like non-go-to-market people think, like you'll often ask them like, oh, what's your ICP? And they'll start describing company behavior instead of company traits. And a lot of the times what the go-to-market engineer has to do is they have to think how to translate company behavior into company traits. Right? So it's sort of like, okay, how can I do this shift? And it's kind of like a translation that doesn't really make a lot of sense, does it?
No, I really agree with that. And I think also the example that you just gave really demonstrates very well what Clay did, right? Because they generated the demand. Now there's GTM engineer roles. Apparently 50% of them are not even mentioning Clay in the job description, right?
Yeah.
So that means they are really driving the category.
Exactly, yeah.
And still have also uncaptured demands there for themselves while doing that, right? So now you have the two motions as they started setting up the SDR function themselves. Kind of interesting, but they like applied it very well, right? So if we would look at another example here, for example, Aircall, I recently did some research on them, found some very interesting things there that could kind of indicate, let's call it GTM bloat, like there are too many people, too little people hitting quota. Like to me, that's already number one indicator. Like I'm not a CEO of a huge SaaS company. It just sounds logical to me that if you have like 75% of your people not hitting quota, something is wrong. Inherently wrong, right? Either it's the quota, it is the amount of people, probably the combination of both. But you're trying to make unrealistic things happen, which can be great to set big goals, but it will create a lot of like unnecessary pressure, change, and like it doesn't come across as like being very clear.
And in a world full of noise, screaming louder won't take you very far.
Exactly. So sending to everyone with a laptop, hey, you do calls, you should use this, probably won't work. But, if we would apply the predictive GTM approach on them, what could be some tactics that they could apply?
Yeah, so for Aircall helps businesses. Aircall provides a cloud solution to help businesses with their support or with their outreach, right? So I think some of the things they could be looking within Centrion, for example, would be they could look for companies who are mentioning like using AI in their customer service.
Okay.
Or companies who have a lot of like cold calling roles open, right? Or companies who are specifying cold calling on job descriptions. Could also be companies who are mentioning AI in customer support department jobs, meaning that, like you already have a lot of information there. It's an AI forward company, so they're opening to AI solutions. They have a need because they're hiring cold callers, so they're not only needing to scale their cold calling operations, which is a great fit for what we're doing, but it also means that they do cold calling. Not all companies do cold calling, So it kind of like fills the box on all of those, and I would say that would be like a decent campaign for them.
Amazing. And one other use case that we spoke of, would be like let's take a more new kid on the block, I would say. Let's say I found here goperfect.com. Recruiting software, AI recruiting software, right? Many out there. What could they be looking at? Specifically, job posts, I think, would be insanely interesting.
Yeah, I think there's like a few things you could do there. Like you could, for like one, like look for companies that have a lot of open roles, meaning that they're scaling, like hiring faster. You could look for companies hiring in-house recruiters. You could look for companies who are mentioning candidate outreach, employer branding, companies who are mentioning employee retention. Yeah, I would say on the behavior side, that's it. And then on the trade side, I would be looking for industries and sectors where you know that there's a very high chance of churning, and where you need, and where it's like very labor intensive.
Right.
Manufacturing.
A lot of screening needs to happen.
Yeah, exactly. And where, you know, like construction, you know, people like come in and they leave. You need a lot of people because, you know, that's how
hard to reach them. Also, they don't check their email. They don't
exactly. Yeah, that's a very good niche, honestly, for outreach. Because it's like they're usually not on LinkedIn.
Yeah,
you know. So if anyone wants to start a product for that, that would be a great idea. Yeah, that's sort of what I would think specifically for that customer.
And so while we're rounding off here, maybe a few hot takes, right? You've already mentioned it. We've kind of addressed it. Do you think that a lot of people are just chasing the same signals, but still they kind of hoping for different results?
Yeah. That's a very good question, and it's a lot. We've done like a lot of thinking about this, and I think there's a fair share of like education to the market that Centrion needs to be doing, because when we mention job postings and when we mention hiring signals, a lot of people think of it as a trigger, right? So they think like, what can I do with this? So if companies hiring SDR, means they might need sales help. If companies hiring a recruiter, they might need recruiting help, right? So those things are all very true, but there's an extra layer, right? Which is the job description. And that's where the gold's hidden. That's where you know which projects are developing, initiatives, so on and so forth. And that's kind of like what we changed like in Centrion versus like any other platform that is offering job postings, is that within Centrion, you can create custom signals. And what these custom signals mean is that you can build a list of companies who are improving, who are adopting AI in their recruiting department. You know,
right.
Like there's no, you can't go out there and like get this signal, right? But you can set it within Centrion. And that's kind of like where I think people should be looking at, is like, not what are signals that I could use, but what are signals that would mean that they would need my solution.
Right.
Like what needs to be true for to me to say that they need my product, right? And that's where you can kind of like look for those custom pain points, those custom projects, those custom area of investment that are often very present in job postings. And we kind of built Centrion in a way to enable that and to make that very easy.
That's amazing. So for everyone listening, I would say like the kind of exercise or homework or main takeaway from this would be to think about it for your business, right? Think about which relevant jobs you could look at. Check some job descriptions and look for mentions, keywords in those job descriptions that could be relevant for your solution, right? Then just go to Centrion, sign up for a free trial, or contact Rafael directly. And you can...
By the way, for podcast listeners, I'll give you like a nice discount.
Okay, amazing. So, then just like, see what's the volume there and just test it out, right? Because I think we launched this concept now, Predictive GTM, that's going to increase win rate, it's going to increase GTM efficiency, it's going to give a lot of clarity to revenue leaders, but also to product teams, etc., right? And it's going to make people more focused and hopefully kind of increase the success again of outbound, right?
So hopefully we can drive those reply rates up and increase those conversion rates. And if you want to get started on Centrion, you just gotta, depending on when you're seeing this, right now we're running a private beta with select customers, but you can always message me and we can give you guys access. And it's very simple. You just put your website there, we generate like all the predictive go-to-market plays that we think are good for you, and then you can just get started immediately. So
amazing. Thank you so much for coming on, Rafael. We'll leave all the information in the description. And thank you so much if you made it until the end for listening. Please feel free to let us know your opinion. And also, all support is very much appreciated through liking, following, subscribing if you're seeing this on YouTube, or just shooting us a little thank you message on LinkedIn. We'll do as well.
Yeah, for sure.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for the invite. It was a pleasure, and thank you for those listening at home.